Well, hello everyone, and this is a very special opportunity for me and for all of you who are viewing this as a part of our connection service, or beyond that. We want the world to hear and see what we're about to experience together, which is a conversation with my good friend, first of all, my physician, our church member here at Prestonwood, and that is Dr. Ken Cooper. What a privilege it's been to be your pastor, yours and Millie's, for 33 years, the day I got here, and active members of Prestonwood before that. Their children were raised here in the church, some of their grandchildren
still in the church.
And are here, and Ken and Millie are just faithful. If Ken is in town and Millie, they are in the same place every Sunday, so I can always check roll with you and Millie. I know when you're there, and I always look for you, and I can always count on you, because he's not only a great Christian, but an outstanding churchman. I appreciate that so much about you, Ken, that you've not only loved the Lord, but you've loved the church, and been such a great member here at Prestonwood. And then just on a personal level, your attention to me as your patient, and I've been doing a physical at the Cooper Clinic for 34 straight years. And Dr. Cooper is my physician, and so he's helped me along the way a number of times, and we're very grateful. So Ken, I just want to talk about really your life, your legacy. We want to get into the mission of what you're all about, which is preventative medicine, helping people live well and long, and to live life in a way that they're fully living all the way to when they get to heaven. And so let's start with your upbringing. You were raised in Oklahoma, right?
Born and raised in Oklahoma City. The first 26 years of my life was in Oklahoma, including my pre-med and medical school time. But left there and have been in Dallas now for 52 years, been in Texas now for a total of 62 years, so I'm more Texas than I am Oklahoma.
Yeah, but your father was in the medical field. He was a dentist, yes, I believe.
Periodontist.
Yeah. And a periodontist. And so as a young man, when did you start thinking you would be a physician?
Well, as early as 5 years of age, they told me I was talking about becoming a doctor. Now, of course, really? A doctor could be a dentist. My father he said physicians or dentists are doctors too, and he talked about doctors and physicians or dentists. No, that was at an early age, so I always had that commitment to try to direct my life in that area, and so I never wavered from that, going through pre-med medical school and all. So the Lord had a design in my life.
Yeah, and you were an athlete. You were involved, as you might expect, with Dr. Ken Cooper and his mission of running and staying in shape. That he was a runner early on, and you were tracking.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
In fact, it was against the objection of my father, by the way, because back in those days, this was in the 40s, when there was a great fear about exercising too much, because your heart would get enlarged, get muscular, and then when you stop exercising, that muscular heart converts into fat, and you die early. And my father was so concerned about that, all the exercise. I was playing basketball, made All-State in basketball as well as even played football for a while. I was just doing too much. He was convinced I was going to be shortening my life. I've outlived him by 14 years, because he died at 77, I'm now 91. But that was a misnomer that we had back in those early days, because we didn't have the technology we have at the present time. For example, we noticed that the enlarged heart that you would see in an athlete was actually a dilatation of the heart, not a thickening of the muscle per se. But that's the reason too that why the heart rate responds to aerobic type conditioning by going down. Because as the heart dilates, we see that now with echocardiograms and the modern technology, sonograms, we can see it's been an enlarged heart. There's more effective ejection fraction, we call that. More pumping is better from the heart, and so the heart rate drops. So once you get involved aerobic in a conditioning program, the average American male is 72, mine runs 48 to 50. And it's been that way for a long time, and that's the routine for.
So your resting heart rate is 48 to 50
48
to this
50
day.
Routinely.
Yeah, that's
and
amazing.
it stayed that way for years, because they didn't have to work as hard. At one time we thought, this is one of the myths that we had in the book came out, you have a certain number of heartbeats, and once you burn up all those heartbeats, you're going to die. Well, that was the critics I had in the book came out in '68, because your heart rate goes up with exercise.
Yeah.
But the few minutes that you exercise, 30, 40 minutes a day, compared to what you get that resting heart rate being 20 beats less, you're still way ahead. If you talk about there's a total number of heartbeats, I can still defeat that criticism.
That's good. Well, when he speaks of the book coming out in 1968, and I want to get back to your personal story in a minute, but just to give context to that, the book that came out in 1968 that really changed the world in many ways, certainly the views regarding exercise and health and fitness, and it's called Aerobics. I was a senior in high school. You were in your late 30s when this book came out, a young, dynamic physician. You'd moved here to Dallas, I believe, or were you still in San Antonio when this book was written?
First two books were in San Antonio.
Yeah, you wrote them in San Antonio. So we'll get back to the book, but this is Aerobics, the most effective physical fitness plan ever, exclamation points. It says this is for men and women. So it's a great, great book. And Ken has written, how many? 19?
19
You said
total.
19 books, and it's sold over 30 million copies. So the message is out there. I mentioned in the introduction he's a physician, and we're going to get more about his professional career in a moment, but he's also a great speaker. So in addition to these books that he's written, he's spoken to thousands upon tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people around the world.
52 countries.
52 countries. That same year, this is really good. This is a Reader's Digest, and it's a cover story, 50 cents for the Reader's Digest right there. March 1968, How to Feel Fit at Any Age, Aerobics, the new exercise program developed by a U.S. Air Force doctor. Okay, so that's a good place to turn around. So I want to see how you got in the Air Force. So you go to Oklahoma University, you want to become a doctor. At one time, you felt like you wanted to be a missionary doctor, is that right?
Well, that is correct. I dedicated my life at 18 years of age at Falls Creek Baptist Assembly in southern Oklahoma to become a full-time medical missionary to China. And I've kept it in my mind over the years, but I never felt the calling, though, to go into the seminary, become a full-time missionary, work in some rural hospital. But I've been to China, as you know, some 18 times, and I've even met with President Xi back in 2013. I even heard he made the statement that the most fearful enemy to the health of the Chinese children is obesity. You wouldn't think of that, obese children in China, but it is. And so we actually signed a contract, that was back in 2017, to help them Cooperize China by the year 2030. So I've had that type of relationship with the Chinese, which far exceeded my expectations. Instead of working with some rural hospital, I've been working with the top people in China on down.
Well, so God had another path for you.
Another path. That was
and now your influence in China is immense. But God's path for you was preventative medicine, and you go to med school at the University of Oklahoma, right? And then from there to the Air Force. And tell us about that experience.
Well, first of all, I had an epiphany in my life because when I finished medical school, an internship, well, as typically happens, you get into medical school and the stress is such that you don't have time to exercise and you have to eat to keep awake at night, and we all gain weight. And I started my athletic career, University of Oklahoma, weighing 168. But 6 years later, having gone through medical school, an internship, and got married, that didn't help too, but I gained up to 204 pounds. But 204 pounds at 29 years of age, I went water skiing again for the first time in many years at Lake Texoma. About halfway through that water skiing experience, I developed chest pain. I had cardiac arrhythmia. I thought I was having a heart attack. Get me to the side, get me to the side. They got me to the side, I went to the hospital there direct. By the time I got there, the heart rate had come back to normal. A very thorough diagnostic workup revealed I didn't have any heart disease. Doc, you're just out of shape. I couldn't believe that, 29 years of age. Well, that's epiphany, because what happened, I lost that weight within 6 months. I dropped back to 160, I weigh 164 at the present time. I've kept it off during that period of time too. But then I started running, and I ran my first marathon a year later. So I completely changed my lifestyle at age 29. And so as a result of that epiphany, and I saw something happening. I was pre-diabetic during that time when I was overweight. I had hypertension, but once I lost that weight and got in shape, that all disappeared. I thought, this is a field of medicine that's been sadly ignored. The whole thing of prevention of disease. Because I was taught in medical school that preventive medicine is the Cinderella of the medical specialty, because there's no profit in health. The profit's in disease. 52 years ago here in Dallas, they told me I could be successful if I limited my practice taking care of healthy people. Well, we have 150,000 patients in our database now from all over the world that are coming in, and 74% return patients. So we are getting results with our patients. We're now, with all this information we collect on our patients, some 3,000 bits of data in our database goes into our Cooper-centered longitudinal study at our research institute. And from that, we published over 600 papers proving that exercise is medicine. So now the criticism, most of my critics have passed away. But again, if I hadn't changed, I hadn't had an epiphany, that was a minor invention in my life. If I'd had that epiphany, I would have passed away because there's only 15 of us left of 106 in medical school class in 1956.
Oh my goodness. And so from medical school then you have this epiphany and onto the Air Force where you begin to train pilots? Or?
Well, let me tell you how that happened because I was deferred because the Berry plan, they didn't get drafted, you have to go to Korea, you have to go to Vietnam. And so we had to pay back. That's required 2 years once you finish your medical school and internship.
Okay.
So then I had to pay back the military for the 2 years. And so I wasn't married at the time. And so I wanted to go to places like Germany or Korea or someplace like that to get my 2 years out of the way. They ended up sending me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Fort Sill? In Lawton, Oklahoma.
Yeah,
Oh,
which is
beautiful
only 90
spot.
miles from home, Oklahoma
Yeah.
City.
I pastored in Duncan, 30 miles from there. So
We have some mutual friends there and patients there, as you know.
Yes, we do.
But then after I got in the Army, I was an Army flight surgeon. I learned to fly helicopters, so I was in the Army. And I decided that in case the space program was just its infancy at that time, but there's a possibility of becoming a sinus astronaut. So I decided to transfer from the Army to the Air Force, this is 1960, and to go into the aerospace medicine program. So I got my aerospace medicine boards, I got my boards in preventive medicine. I went the route to become a sinus astronaut. In 2 years, I worked with NASA. And I helped them develop technology, which is developing something that's worldwide too. We helped them develop the technology to be able to accurately monitor an EKG on an exercising subject, which you know all about that. But back in those early 1960s, we did not have the technology to be able to do that. Bill Thornton was working with me in this astronaut program. And so we worked with the technology, got a very valuable way to do that, very accurate way to do that, which is used particularly for the astronauts in space, extravehicular and all, which is now transitioned to be stress testing that we do routinely around the world. And that's enabled us to pick up coronary disease long before it causes a symptom. We have now passed, when they told me when I came to Dallas, I'd go before the Board of Censors because they're going to run me out of town because I'm doing something as dangerous as treadmill stress testing.
Yeah, I want people to hear that. When he first got here to Dallas, as he just said, they wanted to run you out of town because they thought what you were going to do was killing people, putting them on treadmills, telling them to exercise.
Exactly.
In that era, that was just pretty much unheard of. And what's amazing to me is Dr. Cooper is really a pioneer in health and preventative medicine. And today, sometimes I'll say to Dr. Cooper, when I see all these studies coming out, the value of exercise to health, I say to Dr. Cooper, don't you get tired of being right all the time on this? Because he was one of the few people in the world, doctors in the medical community, that was saying these things, that you should get in shape, you should exercise your heart to get stronger in order to stay healthier. And so they actually wanted to get his license, take your license away from you.
Well,
right?
they didn't want me to practice medicine in Dallas because you're going to kill people on the treadmill. Well, I done it in the Air Force. We don't over 1,000 tests in the Air Force. So I gave a very erudite presentation to the board that night.
Yeah.
And so instead of my wrist being slapped or being censored, the second person in town to have a treadmill for stress session with the chairman of the Board of Censors. So now this ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But we've done over 300,000 maximum performance treadmill stress tests in the last 52 years, and 16.1% are abnormal or equivocal. Only 5% knew they had a problem. That means 11% of the people that we've tested over this period of time have had heart disease diagnosed at the clinic they didn't know about. And keep in mind, the most common first symptom of severe underlying heart disease is sudden death. 40% of people die of heart attacks, the only symptom that they ever have. So being able to identify people like that and be able to say that you got a problem here, you didn't know you had because you've had no symptoms. And when people come, on average, we'll have 3 or 4 patients per week, with 175 patients per week that we see, that'll come in and think they're perfectly healthy. And we'll find they have a high blood cholesterol, they have a coronary calcification score that's elevated, they have an abnormal stress test. We immediately do a CT angiogram. We do the angiogram where you inject the dye into the arm, and within 45 minutes we had the results. And by doing this, then we send people over to the hospital the next day within a few hours after that, as we did with George Bush, and he says, I went to Cooper Clinic, saved my life. And he had 98% obstruction of the widowmaker at the LAD. A million angioplasty stents saved his life. That was almost 10 years ago. That's happened many, many times. So they come to the hospital, so they come here think they're perfectly healthy. Because our goal at the clinic, number one, is prevent disease. If we can't prevent it, diagnose it early. And we're doing that effectively. Been able to show that people have been coming to our clinic at least 20 times over the past 45 years, 100,000 people in that category. They're living 10 years long on the national average. So this is the advantage of having this examination on a regular basis to pick up disease that you didn't realize you had. Up to 76% of the diseases we have are the result of our lifestyle. The current issue decision magazine we talk about, can cancer be prevented? Up to 80% of cancers can be prevented. That's quoting from the American Cancer Society now. And I've been criticized on that in making that statement. You limit obesity, inactivity, cigarette smoking, alcohol, you can drop cancer deaths by at least 65 to 70%. I've said that for years. Now they say it's 80%. You add to that cancer screening, such as mammography, such as colonoscopy, things of that type. So we have some answers there, and as far as the field of preventive medicine is concerned, they're still sadly ignored. I can't understand why that. I was asked by Congressman Burgess from here in Dallas, asked to speak to the caucus of physicians at the Congress. There are about 20 of them that are physicians or dentists or pharmacists, and I had a chance by television, by view to speak to that group and talk about the importance of preventive medicine. I got nowhere. There's no interest in prevention of disease in this country. Physicians don't know how to do it. They can't do it because it isn't taught in medical school. You aren't taught nutrition in medical school. You aren't taught exercise physiology in medical school. Nothing about stress management. Things that are the foundation of our program is not taught in medical school. Where I learned my information as far as nutrition and exercise physiology was Harvard School of Public Health. I spent 2 years there. Master's of Public Health, with my doctorate of exercise physiology. So I was able to embrace that. Now this was just happenstance because I was in Harvard. I was because of my aerospace medicine program. I had to go up to Harvard, get my master's in public health to fulfill my requirements for aerospace medicine. But while up there, I got interested in running again, as I mentioned. That's where I ran the Boston Marathon, and I placed 101st in the Boston Marathon. That sounds dramatic. That was back in 1962. Only 150 people running back in those days. So that's not so great. But now we have 35,000 people run the marathons. The first book came out, and I saw titles in medical newspaper articles that the street's going to be full of dead joggers as more Americans follow Cooper. So that was divine intervention. People have been so successful in the last 52 years, going from ground zero to office to employees. Now we have a 30-acre facility, as you know, with over 600 employees and 34 full-time physicians, and a database of 150,000 patients. Why have you been so successful? I've said without question, number one, divine intervention, because there have been so many times over the past 52 years, I need to make a decision. I want to go one way. If I'd gone the other way, I wouldn't be here today. That includes bankruptcy at 8 to 91. It includes the criticism I've had over the years. If we'd had a death on the tracks at the aerobics center with treadmill stress signals early years, I'd have been wiped out, for sure. So the Lord protected me during that period of time. And I was asking Billy the other day, I said, I wonder why so many of my medical school classes have already died, and I'm still alive. He said, because the Lord's not through with you yet. I think there may be some truth to that, because many things we're working on now, the documentary that we'll be putting out, we have the first phase of that. This is going to be going around through UNESCO. We're working on that. Autobiography being prepared now, all these various things. I'm 91 years of age. I shouldn't be doing those things still.
Well, you are a model for your mission, and you have practiced what you have preached. And look, I mean, you're so vital and strong, and mentally you're just sharing your message still. It's remarkable. But let's back up just a little bit on the faith side of things. You said divine intervention. Talk to us about your faith. And I know you began as a believer early on as a child, but then I think I've heard you say, when you talk about that Air Force period, you felt sort of stuck in your life, and maybe or something like that, and you were trying to find your purpose.
That's
What's
right.
my purpose?
That was in 1970, because I was working with NASA. I was designed to go ahead and become a scientist astronaut going through the program. But Bill Thornton stayed with the program. I got out because I always said, Bob Buford said at the halftime in his book, he said, you can be successful but not significant. I felt, this had to be divine, I felt I was successful. I was lieutenant colonel, going to be promoted to full colonel, but they wanted me to leave my position at the Aerospace Medical Laboratory Clinical down in San Antonio and go become commander of a small hospital. I had to have some administrative experience before I could ever expect to be a general officer in the Air Force. I may have been able to be the Surgeon General perhaps, or something of that type. But I had to make that decision. And boy, we prayed long and hard about that. So at that age, at that time, in 1970, whether I leave the Air Force, 13 years, 7 more years, get retirement, or I stay on, or I get out and walk away. So I decided, without divine intervention, that with divine intervention, I'm going to leave because I think there's another calling for me because I'd been successful in the Air Force, but I didn't think I'd been significant. So that's what's happened. I left, came to Dallas, didn't have any money, had all sorts of problems to try to get started, and I thought I made a mistake. In fact, in the documentary we're doing, I made point almost, I got so disgusted, almost went back in the Air Force. Because the criticism was so great back those early days. He wouldn't accept my concept, they tried to run me out of town. The medical school was on my back and all sorts of things. You can't be successful in Dallas unless we endorse you at the medical school. And I said, well, I don't need that to get a hospital permissions in Dallas. So it's just a lot of controversy. And it was just a plan there I didn't realize. But if I'd stayed in, as Bill Thornton stayed and became a scientist astronaut, it took him 17 years to get his first flight into space. I'd have wasted all that time if I'd gone ahead and gone the astronaut route. But we developed a program for the astronauts while in space. We did the bed rest studies. We had bicycle ergometers strapped onto a bed. And we had these airmen basics lying flat on their back for 2 weeks. And having one group exercise, the other group didn't exercise. And we could show by lying in that supine position, which simulates what happens in weightlessness, that we could prevent that deterioration that occurs when you get into weightless space. Because what happens with these astronauts who are in space for a short period of time, they lose their baroreceptors. That's ability to handle one gravity, 1G. And so they come back to Earth, they sit up and they pass out. And that can be a very serious situation, a survival situation. So it's critical for us to do something for the astronauts while in space to be able to keep that deterioration from occurring. And that's what Bill and I worked on. So we got the bicycle ergometer. That's what they're using regularly now up there to do that. They do some weight training against the resistance you have to do up and down since it's a weightless space and all. And got all those things got, and now we've resolved that problem. So that was another contribution that we made. That with the treadmill stress testing is now ubiquitous all over the world, picking up early coronary disease, is being able to help the astronauts to alleviate the problems that they have in space. And other things people don't, one thing people forget about that I was able to implement was limiting trans fats from the American diet back in 2002. I don't know whether you even knew that.
Oh, I remember. No, I remember.
And that was working with Frito-Lay and PepsiCo. When Steve Rahman, the CEO of PepsiCo, came in, this is October 2002. And he said, we realize we're partially responsible for the obesity epidemic in our American children, which has been phenomenal since 1990, and our adults and children, as you know. But what can we do to eliminate the saturated fats? They said, no, Steve, you need to eliminate the trans fat. This was published back in 1996, talk about 2002. Published in 1996, New England Journal of Medicine by my friend from Harvard School of Public Health, Walt Woolen. And he pointed out that there are trans fats that have been developed by the food industry because, number one, they're cheap. Number two, they can prolong the shelf life and they don't destroy the taste. So they're ideal. But they ignore the fact, he pointed out in the New England Journal of Medicine, that they lower the good or HDL cholesterol and increase the LDL or bad cholesterol, the worst thing you can possibly do. And they're accountable for hundreds of thousands of deaths every year because of trans fats in the diet. So we made that decision to do that with PepsiCo, and there was a decision here at their headquarters in Plano at Frito-Lay. They were on my back because they said you're going to have to, and he said we're going to take all the trans fats out of the Frito-Lay products, but it's going to cost $13 million to do that, to retool to do that. And we're not going to increase the price of the product by gouging the consumer. We're going to keep the price the same. Well, what's going to happen to our bonuses? What's going to happen to our with all this? We have to just accept that. But I said, just hold the phone. Because the stock was selling for $9 a share, it went up to $109 a share. It started another revolution went around the world. And Walker in the UK now, they've taken all the trans fats. In 2006, the FDA made it mandatory. You have to get trans fats on the American diet. And all the companies did this except McDonald's, and they were the greatest source of trans fats in the American diet until they finally changed. They couldn't change the French fried potatoes was a major source of trans fats in the American diet. And so they finally got the measure, were able to change that. So now it's all over the United States. We're saving at least 100,000 lives a year by taking the trans fats out. That all happened in 2002.
Yeah.
Just another one of those pictures. I don't know why I did that.
Yeah. Well, God's given you wisdom. The Bible talks about wisdom. And so you have a keen intellect for sure. And you're smart. And you studied and you still study. He keeps up every day with the latest science and research and all the rest. But there's something beyond that, too, that I always have seen in Ken, and that is Dr. Cooper has wisdom. And I believe God has given you wisdom on these things and insight and knowledge beyond the ordinary. And you've been open. One of the things that you do and you encourage others to do when they get Cooperized is I know every day you begin your day with some scripture and prayer. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Right now I'm reading through the Haggai Institute every morning at devotions. Just reading one.
So you
this
read
morning.
a devotion most every day of some
yes,
kind?
Yes, I do every morning.
And
I have my Bible study and I have my prayer list. But this morning I was reading one with this a person from India who went through the Haggai program and talked about that a relative came and said, I've got this backache and I just can't get control of it. And he said, well, why don't you pray to Jesus and see if he can't relieve that? And she said, you mean that man that was hung on the cross? And he said, yes. He said, well, how can he help me? He couldn't help himself. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that, but you understand why his death on the cross was so extremely important to us. Even though he, quote unquote, didn't help himself, he helped us. Mm. But that was the thing I read about this morning. I think it's appropriate I talked about that today. Mm-hmm. But just think about that. How can he help me with my back when he couldn't even help himself on the cross? Mm. A lot of people have that attitude, you know.
Well, he certainly has helped us in forgiving our sins and to rise again on the third day and to give us life. You know, there's a statement that Christ gives us not only life to our years, but years to our life as well. But that's what I know Ken has been, Dr. Cooper has been your goal, is to help people. You know, certainly your faith is well known. You've practiced your faith, lived your faith. You share your faith with your patients. But you've helped people add life to their years. And I know that's something you're very concerned about. And, you know, we're all these days looking at our health and how we can be healthier. And because I'm convinced health, you know, helps create happiness in our lives. I mean, if you lose your health, you lose so much. And so many people lose their health today. We have a health crisis in America. So you can call it being Cooperized. But you have about 8 principles, if you will, precepts that if you practice these things, and my good friend Franklin Graham has asked you to write regular articles in Decision magazine. In fact, I have some of these right here. Really, really good. Each week.
This was the first one.
Yeah, that was the first one, and that's the same one there.
And it was entitled, How God Has Had His Hand on My Life.
Yeah.
That's the one. This is the first one back in January of 2021.
So I told Ken, there it is, how God has his hand on my life. And I would really encourage you, by the way, to get Decision magazine. You can get it mailed
and this is
like
the latest
this.
One. This is the latest one right now. Cancer deaths to be prevented.
So Dr. Cooper, I told him when these started coming out, and Franklin invited him to do it. And you can get these online, by the way, as well. You can go to Decision and they will put up on the screen ways that you can reach it, because this is a really good magazine on all fronts, whether it's physical health, cultural issues, obviously spiritual issues.
He talks about body and soul. I'm concentrating on the body.
Yeah.
He talks about.
And we are body, soul, and spirit. So what are some of the things that, because it would be great if everybody in the world could come to Cooper Clinic and get a physical and be a part of this program. I've had a privilege of doing that so many years. But maybe somebody lives in Montana or China. What are the general principles of health that you've been sharing all these years? Health and longevity and just vitality. That's a big word for me. I'm 72 now, and my energy levels are off the charts. I mean, and I can't tell hardly any difference in the way I feel and my energy levels than I may have felt years ago.
You're preaching some of the best you've ever had.
Well, thank you. That's I just pray it doesn't get worse. But no, in big part, and I'm not a perfect patient of Dr. Cooper, but I do live by the basic principles of this, and we're always working on it. I'm a work in progress still. But he's helped me along the way. We've been able to catch some things in a physical that did some preventative work for me. I'm really grateful for that. I had prostate cancer in 2009, and Dr. Cooper, that was 13 years ago, and I'm now cancer-free, and that's in great part because of preventative medicine. And I did the PSA test every year, and Dr. Cooper picked it up, and we were able to take care of that, and God healed me in the midst of that. But so what are some of these principles that you would share with a patient? Let's just say there's a patient sitting right across, as I've done many times at your desk after a physical. What would you say to people as to what they need to be doing?
Your health is your responsibility. It's not what the government does for you, what the insurance company does for you. It's what you do for yourself determines how well and how long you live. And no drug can replicate the benefits of an active lifestyle. Just keep that in mind. But you talk about the examination is expensive, but you have to realize a few things can be done that cover the basics primarily. For number one, get your body weight and your height and get your body mass index. You go to the computer, you go to the internet and get that. And we know it should be less than 25. But we have, at the present time, we have a 70% American population are above 25 to 30, they're overweight. Now 25 to 30 is overweight, 30 to 35 is obese, and 35 above is morbidly obese. And so just get your height and weight, and you go to the internet and get your body mass index. That's a very simple thing to do. Get your blood pressure. That's very simply done. You can get it done in grocery stores and places like that, or drugstores, see if you can't go to a physician. But then get your blood study. At least get your lipid profile. Give it what your cholesterol is, your triglycerides. That's very important as far as heart disease is concerned. And then you evaluate for diabetes. You get your test for your urine to get your diabetes test. That can be done very simply, inexpensively, those basic things. Now you go on to the extreme like we do. Now this is a Cadillac version. That's the Model T version. But both can be successful. And the most important thing I tell my patients, you don't have to run marathons or 10Ks or 5Ks. All you need to do is to avoid inactivity. A study we published back in 1984 it's the most important study we've ever published in scientifically published in the Medical Association, entitled Physical Fitness All Cause Mortality. And we pointed out in following 13,600 people for a period of 8.6 years, I could get that move up one step from very poor to poor on the treadmill stress test. They could increase their life expectancy by 6 years, decrease their small causes by 58%. Going all the way out here to the end, the top category of fitness, only a 9-year increase in longevity and 65%. The best return on your fitness investments is avoiding inactivity, because 90% of the people in America, if they will go from category 1 to category 2 by getting 30 minutes, collective or sustained, most days per week, of some type of aerobic activity, you can move, almost guarantee you'll move from category 1 to category 2. What do you want to know? It's so simple to do this. It's not something that's very expensive. It's what you do for yourself determines how well you live and where you square off the curve. As I've told you earlier, our people are following 100,000 patients for 45 years, and they're squaring off the curve, living a long, healthy life and dying this way. They are dying this way. If I die tomorrow, I praise the Lord. I've had a great life. I prefer to go that way than this way. Of 6.5 million Americans having Alzheimer's, they can't recognize their family for the last few years of their life. As you know, I don't want to go that way. I want to go this way. My father practiced essentially all day on a Friday and died on Monday. He's only 77 years of age, unfortunately. I didn't know then what I know now. My mother died at 82, and she won the president's election the day before she died. They both squared off the curve. A wonderful way to go. So our people are doing that, but our people are living 10 years on the national average. Our women are dying 90.4 years of age, or maybe 86.5 years of age. That's 10 years on the national average. So we've proven what you do for yourself can prolong your life and improve the quality of life. And that's our goal, how to live life healthier and longer. Dying young when you're old is really what it is. This new book that came out by Kopecky from the Mayo Clinic, he's talking about live younger longer. And he's talking about something I've been promoting in this other controversial thing, is the importance of physicians evaluating for the C-reactive protein for chronic inflammation. There's another controversial thing. One of my friends here, one of my accountants here in Dallas, went to an internist in Dallas for his use for the cursory type examination. He said, I want to have a C-reactive protein measured. That's a blood study. Why do you want that? Because it measures chronic inflammation. Who's telling you that? Oh, Dr. Ken Cooper told me that. I say, forget about him, he's a nut. That happened the last couple of weeks. So that's still the acceptance I have amongst some of the medical community. We're all over the world. People come all over the world.
Well, by the way, let me just say he's being modest. I mean, I'm sure there are people that would say something like that, but Dr. Cooper has been accepted worldwide now as a physician, a pioneer in preventative medicine. And as I said earlier, I mean, everything he's been saying through the years has now been proven that it works, and it works in people's lives. And I've seen it. I'm a testimony to that, and so are many others that I know. You've got people like, you've had a lot of celebrity patients like Roger Staubach and Roger's 80, Troy Aikman, there's a couple of Dallas Cowboy quarterbacks. You mentioned George W. Bush. And so they're just, so you're being modest, to say, inflammation. Well, I do a lot of reading in this myself because I'm interested in it. And there's no question that chronic inflammation is a big problem. And all the processed foods that we eat, and the lack of exercise, inactivity, that is producing inflammation. It's like It's like it's been explained to me, like if you get something on your skin and it turns red, that's inflammation. Well, that can happen inside and all over your body,
You can
right?
have an acute infection, but then you have something smoldering. That's called chronic inflammation.
Yeah.
And this article by Kopecky is very important because I told you those people that kept themselves in shape for that 25 years and 50 to 75 years had 36% reduction in Alzheimer's dementia as compared to people in the bottom 20% because they had less chronic inflammation because they were lean and trim during that period of time, active during that period of time. These people are overweight and inactive during that period of time. And so in this book by Kopecky, he talks about the things that are related to chronic inflammation. Alzheimer's disease is number one. On down the list, cancer, diabetes, chronic fatigue, depressive immunity, sexual dysfunction, depression, osteoporosis, fatty liver disease, macular degeneration, and heart disease, all those. Now look at the causes of chronic inflammation. Number one is poor nutrition. Number two, decreased exercise. Number three, any smoking. Number four, unmanaged stress. Number three, excess spirits, that's alcohol. Next is inadequate sleep and too much weight. It's all there.
Yeah.
These are the answers to it. But physicians don't know about chronic inflammation, and I'm preparing one of the documentaries. You know, we have the first documentaries already available. We had 1 and 2 already available. I'm working on 3 more at the present time. And one is going to be going directly to physicians to emphasize the importance of practicing preventive medicine, because preventive medicine in medical schools is nothing but giving immunization. Preventive medicine isn't taught in medical schools because they don't have any time to talk about this. So we need to teach this to physicians to start looking at chronic inflammation and measuring. You realize you can do something correctly because all these diseases can be corrected. Number two, I want to have something go to medical schools. And there's try to get them to teach preventive medicine like we're practicing successfully here for the last 52 years. That isn't being done anywhere else in the world. They aren't taught that. It's only immunization. And number three is to have a documentary, have one of these sessions, going to be the final one, that's going to be about 30 minutes, that's going to go to the world. I'm going to give this to UNESCO because, you know, we started with this in 2019 when I spoke for the United Nations in New York. And it's cheaper and more effective to prevent disease than to find a cure. And so I wanted to make a documentary with that. They were going to fund it. By the way, it turned out because of COVID, they couldn't fund it. So I'm funding it myself. But this last one, and I get this one done, I'm going to give that UNESCO and to go to all these countries around the world on UNESCO. So that's my goal. That's divine.
And back to the impact of physical fitness and activity. You know, there's a lot of emotional problems people are facing today. We've seen that. It got exposed, really, I think, during the pandemic. Problems that were latent within people surfaced during the fears of the pandemic and the isolation and all the other things that are well documented.
But you know, too, I'll talk about that for a
Yeah,
second
and so
because this first article.
that's what I want to say to you, because exercise has a big impact, or activity and lifestyle has a big activity on your emotional health, correct?
It does. People are less depressed and less hypochondriac, improved self-image, more positive attitude towards life. All those things we've proven people are physically fit. But start referring back to
stress relief. So I know you've talked to me and so many others, and when you go to the Cooper Clinic, they ask you about your stress levels, how you're doing on your stress, because we all have it. So what about just stress relief? I mean, you exercise at the end of every day for a purpose,
the stress
right?
in my life so I can sleep at night.
Yeah.
I've done that for years. Though I don't take any medication to help me sleep. I don't need it because I exercise before I go home. I spend up to 12 hours a day at the office, but before I go home, I work out. Now, I can't run anymore because I broke my leg snow skiing back in 2004, as you know, but I exercise on the bicycle ergometer for 30 minutes. I do my weight training before I go home. I spend about an hour at home. Then I go home and walk the dogs. Everyone should walk their dog whether they have one or not. Keep that in mind, too.
Yeah.
So these are things I practice to control the stress in my life, and they work beautifully for me.
Yeah. So I would really encourage you, just on the spiritual side of things and the emotional side of things, to stay active, because God did make us. In 1 Thessalonians 5:23, it says that we are made body, soul, and spirit. So that's 3 parts to the human being as God created us. You have physical life, body. You have psychological life, which is the soul. It's the word psyche in the New Testament, soul. So it's mind, intellect, emotion, will. So that's the soul. And then there's the spirit, which we relate to God in the spirit. And that's the part of us that's made for God, that must be renewed each day, resurrected if you don't know the Lord, made alive in Christ. But that physical part, with our body, we have physical life. With our soul, we have intellectual, emotional life. And with our spirits, we have spiritual life. So it all works together. And you've taught that and instructed in that way, that when you take care of your body, you're in effect taking care of your soul, the way you think. I remember George W. Bush said one time, I exercise more for my brain. This was when he was president. More for my brain than I do my body, right? Didn't he say that to you?
Exactly right. That is true.
Yeah, and so the ability to calm down. I've heard you say that exercise is a sedative in the sense that it'll calm you down, it'll settle you down.
Without question.
Yeah, and better than an
Controls the ups and
antidepressant.
downs.
If you're
Depressions-
depressed,
depressions and anxieties, it moderates those both
yeah,
extremes.
and not talking about excessive clinical depression, so I don't want to misstate anything, but what I've read and what I believe you believe is that for regular, let's say, depression that is moderate, that exercise is as good or better than pills.
We've published that.
Yeah.
Comparing it with medications. We've published an article on that showing exercise can control depression without the use of medication.
Yeah.
That's been published.
So just get off the couch and go take a walk and or do something. Do body exercise. I'm doing more and more because I think it helps me stretch. Just things on the floor, from push-ups to sit-ups to other kinds stretches of all kinds. And then you want to condition your heart, of course, by getting your heart rate up.
Remember, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. Keep that in mind.
What's good for the heart is good for the brain. And I would say what's good for the brain is good for the spirit, because the way we think is who we are. As a man thinks in his heart, so
Glorify
is he.
God in our body as well as our spirits.
Yeah,
That's
just,
commanded.
in case you didn't hear that, glorify God with your body and your spirit, which belong to the Lord. Well, Dr. Cooper, our prayer for you is that you keep getting this message out, and more people will continue. I've told Dr. Cooper personally, I believe that your message is going to get out more in this decade of your life, his 90-something years. He told you earlier he is 91. I want to be like Dr. Cooper when I grow up, and he hopes to get me to 91, and I'm working to get there. But the point is, not just get to 91. You don't want to be just strapped down in a chair somewhere in a care facility, unless you clearly need it, of course. But you want to live a full and robust life. You want to be on mission your entire life. You want to be able, as Christians, we want to be able to share our faith and be a good example to people around us. And there are a lot of sick people. There are a lot of people watching this who are sick and unhealthy, and you're thinking, well, it's too late for me. It's never too late. Number one, prayer and the power of God can help you and strengthen you and even heal you. Or if you are suffering in some way, to give you the comfort that you need to get through what you're experiencing. And so, Dr. Cooper, I think I admire you so very much. It's been one of the joys of my life to be Ken and Millie's past. How long have you and Millie been married?
63 years.
63 years. Millie is such an incredible asset to Ken and an encouragement to him. I always tell Millie, I said, you believe in your husband and his work, and when many others didn't. This is a good message for wives, by the way. When many of these people were criticizing Dr. Cooper for his viewpoint and not going to make it and all that, Millie was always encouraging you, right? Always saying, keep doing what God's called you to do.
That's true. That's
a great thing. So I hope you'll take these things to heart, and literally and physically, as spiritually as well. But Ken, keep on keeping on, and thank you for your friendship and for your ministry to my own life.
And finally, my goal is for you to live as long and healthy a life as I'm living at 91 years of age.
All right, count on it. I'm going to do it.
And still keep preaching.
I'll do that too. All right. All right. So, well, thank you very much for joining us today on this great conversation. Over the weeks, we're going to have some conversations with people in our church and out of our church that are making a difference in the world. And Ken Cooper is a changed life because of Christ in his heart, and he's changing lives and has through the years, and keeps doing it day after day. And whether you're reading a book or an article, or just when you get out and exercise, if you're a jogger, if you're a runner, if you're a walker, you can thank Dr. Ken Cooper for getting the world exercising 1968 and to this very day, and making a difference physically, emotionally, and spiritually in people's lives. God bless you.